Hello, everybody. My name is Linda Abraham. I'm the president and founder of Accepted. I'm going to be moderating today's webinar, and I want to welcome all of you to How to Get into Medical School with Low Stats to be presented by Alicia McNeese-Namankar. Before we start, there are just a few items that will help you get the most out of the next hour or so, and the most out of the webinar, and one that will help us improve future webinars. Number one, if you have not yet downloaded your webinar worksheet, take a second to do so and print it out. You'll see it. It's in the handout section of your control panel. It will help you to get the most from today's presentation, help you follow along, take notes, etc. Now, Alicia may ask a few questions during the presentation and ask you to raise your hand in response. You can do so by clicking on the hand icon, two icons underneath the horizontal orange arrow on your control panel. If you are attending this webinar because you want to become a physician, and that's your dream career, please raise your hand. Okay, you figured out how to raise your hands. Great. Thank you very much, and most of you are here for the right reason. We use the question window for your questions, and we have a Q&A scheduled, but we also use it for you to answer our questions. So if Alicia asks an open-ended question, please post your response in the question window. Now, when you leave, you're going to receive a brief survey. Please fill it out. We value your feedback, and we use your feedback to both improve webinars and also to decide which webinars to give in the future. Finally, I'm thrilled to introduce Alicia McNeese-Namankar, who will present How to Get into Medical School with Low Stats today. Alicia started advising Accepted's clients in 2012. She immediately was earning rave reviews from her clients and has been earning them ever since. Prior to joining Accepted, she both evaluated applications and advised med school applicants as director of the UC Davis Postbac program. She brings enormous insight and experience with the medical school application process to our webinar today. Without further ado, Alicia McNeese-Namankar, and get accepted to medical school with low stats.
Thank you for joining us, everyone. We're so excited to share some useful, helpful information with you today to give you an edge. So I'm going to start by asking 3 questions. The first question is, are you a first-time applicant or a reapplicant?
Oh, we have an active group too. We're at 79%. Can we get it over 80? 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. With 85% voting, here are the results. Okay. So it's 83% are first-time applicants and 17% are reapplicants.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. And then the second question I have is how many people are planning to apply this cycle? I know we have some early birds who think ahead and that might be planning for next year, but how many students are planning on applying this cycle?
That will just raise your hand. Okay, raise your hand if you're planning to apply this cycle. 46%. All right, so we're just about half are applying this cycle.
Okay, excellent. And kudos to those of you thinking ahead. That really helps. Okay, so the third question I have is which one of your scores, GPA or MCAT, makes you worry the most? So MCAT, GPA, or both? So if you could please click on the quick poll.
With 88% voting, 27% are most concerned about the MCAT, 34% are most concerned about the GPA, and 39% are concerned about both.
Interesting. Okay, this is very helpful.
Yeah.
Thank you. So going into it, there are really 2 main reasons why applying with low scores can hurt us. So the first reason is that currently the MCAT is being used to assess how well a student will perform in their first year of medical school. So having a low MCAT score might hurt the way a selection committee views you. They might anticipate that you will struggle in your first year depending on your score. The second reason is that even though GPA is a less reliable indicator of academic ability, since every campus has so much variability in how challenging their coursework may be, it is still used to determine how strong a student's commitment is to completing their long-term academic goals. So, right, the GPA supplements, the MCAT provides a standardized score across applicants, and GPA is less reliable because, right, different campuses have different levels of difficulty for their courses, but it still demonstrates long-term commitment and ability to reach long-term goals. So you may ask, what is a low MCAT score, right? We get that question every year when we do this webinar, and we finally are going to give you a very definite, specific response. So we're going to discuss two different sources of data today. So we're going to talk about the AAMC MSAR data, which is self-reported by the individual medical schools. And then we're also going to talk about the AMCAS orange sheet. So the orange sheet is published on the AMCAS website under informatics. This data is collected directly from applications. So we're going to first talk about the AMCAS orange sheet data. So looking at the 2016 application cycle, and you can see the data on the screen, and your jaws are probably dropping to the floor right now, right? So students applying to AMCAS, the range of their MCAT scores was 472, so your jaw's probably on the floor, to 501.2 average, to 520 max, because that's a perfect score. So for matriculants, so students accepted into medical school, the range, and this is going to be even more shocking, is 476 minimum to 508.1 average to, of course, a 520 maximum, because that's the highest possible score. So the orange sheet is useful because it gives you a more accurate overview of scores accepted by medical schools, accepted into medical school. So as you can see, the numbers are very, very shocking, and they are low. So applying with an MCAT score below a 500, I would say, is considered low. But you can still get accepted with a low score, as you can see in this data. And this is especially true if you consider applying to DO programs. So a lot of the DO programs don't even share the data for students that they accept. So what can you do about a low MCAT score? So of course, right, option one is to consider retaking the MCAT if you have the energy, time, money. And the best piece of advice that I could give you in over 12 years of experience in admissions and advising students would be that the one thing that all students have in common who I've spoken to who've earned a perfect or near perfect score, the one thing they all have in common is that they stopped everything else and just studied for the MCAT. And on average, right, they took 2 to 3 months off just to prepare for the MCAT. And this is consistent across, right, socioeconomic backgrounds, ethnicities, against all backgrounds, all types of students. It's the one thing that students with perfect or near perfect scores have in common is how much they focused on just studying for the MCAT. And I'm repeating it so that hopefully you will take that away from this webinar. Using your practice exam scores is really the best way to decide whether you should take the exam or not. All of you are training to become doctors, right? And doctors love data, facts, numbers. So in order for you, right, to make the best possible decision, you need data, right? You need the data. So using the data available to you through your practice exam scores, that's the best way to decide if you should or should not take the actual MCAT. And one hint that may be especially useful is that if you haven't yet taken the MCAT, taking a full-timed practice exam before you have started studying, and the scientists out there are going to be thrilled with this idea, will give you a control score, right? If you take a full-time practice exam without studying to create a baseline score, that will give you a sort of control for you to see, right? The progress of your score as you study or cover more content review, as you spend more time practicing the questions, right? That will give you a better idea of how significant your improvement is over time. So with the MCAT, you need an increasing trend in scores. So just like with the GPA, having a decreasing trend will significantly hurt you. So an increasing trend in scores, in your MCAT scores, will significantly help. It doesn't matter how many times you take the MCAT. There is a limit, right? The WNC does have a limit to the number of times you can take the MCAT in a year. I think that's 3 times. And I think it's 7 times you can take it in a lifetime. So while the WNC does put limits on the number of times you can take the MCAT, the number of times you take the exam will not hurt your chances of getting into medical school if you have an increasing trend in your scores. You can always compensate for a lower MCAT with a higher GPA, right? So if you have a higher GPA, then you can mitigate the effects of it by having a higher GPA. I highly recommend, and I had a big discussion with a client today about this, whether or not she should explain her GPA or MCAT score in her primary application essays. And that's such an interesting question, and I so appreciated her for asking it. I definitely do recommend that you explain a lower GPA in your personal statement. And I would use, to be honest, if you struggled the first or second time when you took the MCAT, that would make a fantastic secondary application essay. So if you struggled with the MCAT, I wouldn't address that in the primary application, but I would use that for secondary application material. And of course, if you get a lower first MCAT score, that's not going to hurt you if the second time you took it, your score significantly improved, right? So no matter how low that first score is, it's not going to significantly hurt you because everybody loves the Cinderella story, right? So everybody loves to see significant improvement or progress. So going into the next piece is, what is a low GPA, right? We talked about what's a low MCAT. Now we're going to talk about what a low GPA is. So again, according to the AAMC orange sheet, applicants applying to AMCAS for 2016, the range was a 2.31 to a 4.0. And they do not share the range for matriculant. And I think it's probably because it would be so shocking. Don't you think, Linda?
Probably.
I mean, looking at just the range for applicants, although I really wouldn't recommend somebody apply with a 2.31. I don't think that's a good idea. So the lowest scores that I've helped students get accepted into medical school with, as director of the UC Davis School of Medicine postbac program, for over 5 years, I worked with students from disadvantaged backgrounds applying with low scores. And on average, I help students get into medical school with a 2.7 GPA and about a 23 on the MCAT. And people are always shocked by that. But if you are strategic in how you present yourself, you compensate for any areas of weakness, you provide very logical, strong explanations in your essay, right? The best writing advice I think I ever received was from a legal writing professor at UC Davis, and he said, you want to make people feel good agreeing with you. Isn't that profound?
Yeah, well, it goes in lots of situations, actually.
Right? Yeah. And the second thing I'll never forget him saying, and I can see his face like slow motion, saying these words, the best writing answers more questions than it raises. Yeah, it totally does, right? When you think about it. That's absolutely true. Yeah. Okay, so Interestingly enough, the WMC Orange Sheet doesn't provide the GPAs for matriculants for that range. So just interesting to note. So I want to say, because I know tensions are high, the application opened on Friday, right? I want to say don't be discouraged, because the MSAR, I know all of you are using the medical school admissions requirements handbook. Well, it's no longer handbook. It used to be a printed handbook, but now it's all electronic, and you pay for access to it on the WMC website. But I know you're all using the MSAR, but the MSAR is self-reported data from the medical schools. So that's important to note. They are now sharing ranges in terms of percentages, right? Like the 25th percentile, 50th percentile, 75th percentile. So they are giving you more of a range, and that's new. But they're never, these are self-reported numbers. They're never going to share the true full range of scores accepted. And that's why I think it's so interesting to compare the Orange Sheet to the MSAR, because the numbers are so much lower on the Orange Sheet. Isn't that interesting?
I wonder. I have no idea why, but why the
Yeah, well, I
discrepancy?
think it's two different. I think it's, one is published by the WMC and one is published by AMCAT. And it's just fascinating. I actually called them to find out, and they couldn't give me an answer. It's fascinating. But so applying with a GPA below a 3.0 is considered low. So a 3.0 is often a number used to screen out applicants, right? So some medical schools have screening systems that will actually help them to say, okay, I want you to screen out applicants with GPAs below this number and MCATs below this number. So 3.0 is often like the minimum requirement to be screened into an applicant pool. So you really do want to make sure, right, if you're just a couple courses short of being at a 3.0, it might be worth doing some post-bac coursework just to be at that 3.0. So what can you do about it if you have a low GPA? Of course, you're welcome to work with me or one of my colleagues, right? We're experts in helping students get accepted, helping students with low scores, and working with students from a variety of backgrounds. The second thing you can do is informal post-bac coursework. So completing your own post-baccalaureate coursework, that's the fastest way to get additional coursework. So you're able to apply at the nearest community college or four-year college to start taking classes right as soon as possible. So informal post-bac is the quickest, easiest way to start taking more coursework. However, the thing to keep in mind is if you're not in a formal program, you might not get priority registration. So if you become a second bac student on a college campus, you might get the same priority registration as, say, a freshman, or maybe you register after the freshman, right? You might get the last choice of classes, which might make it harder to get the classes that you want. So that's important to note. The second type of post-bac would be formal post-bac programs, and I have written and published the only book on the topic of pre-medical post-bac programs and alternate pathways, and that's available on Amazon. There's also master's degrees, so depending on what your GPA is, if you do have a low undergraduate GPA, you may need to do undergraduate level post-bac coursework. If you have a slightly higher GPA, but you want to give yourself an edge, doing a master's or special master's degree program would be a great option. And there's a couple reasons for that. If you already have a strong undergraduate GPA, doing a master's degree program would help you get your foot in at the door of a medical school. So schools, some med schools offer special master's programs that they take classes with the first-year medical students. So the beauty of that is that if you're accepted into that medical school, you may just not only end up with a master's degree, but you also start your second year of medical school, which would be fantastic. Um, One thing to caution you about master's degrees or special master's degrees is that it's graduate level coursework. So on the AMCAS application, if you have a low undergraduate GPA, that coursework, the graduate coursework, is calculated separately. So your graduate level coursework is not going to have any impact on your undergraduate cumulative or science GPA. So if you really do have a low or a decreasing trend in your GPA, your undergrad GPA, you need to do undergraduate level post-bac coursework to address that. And a decreasing trend in either your MCAT scores or your GPA is really a kiss of death in an application process. It's the one thing that will help a selection committee decide to reject a client in agreement. The one thing they all agree on. So when applying with those scores, it's especially important for you to focus on the following sections of your application to make them as strong as possible. So the personal statement, and I really do recommend that you use the personal statement as an opportunity to address any issues with your GPA and to demonstrate improvement. Your activities section essays, right? You can demonstrate how active you've been in the community through service or your clinical experiences or leadership. And then through your statement of disadvantage, because this may help explain, why you struggled as much as you did. So the best personal statements, in my experience, address any questions that the selection committee may have about you as a student. So yes, focus on your strengths, but also address or discuss any weaknesses and describe how you have improved. So that's the most important piece. I mean, you can really, if you can demonstrate improvement, you'd be surprised. I've helped students with an F or a D, get into medical school, as long as they retook that course, for an A or a B, and had a very good reason why it happened. But as long as you don't have too many of those grades, right? If you have 4 or 5 F's or D's, that's going to be much more difficult to make it past, make it through the screening process, but also to make it past the selection committee. So it's okay if there are weaknesses as long as you address them. In the activity section, I'm going to ask those of you listening, why do you think the activity section is so important when applying with low numbers?
In the question window, please. Why do you think the activity section is important if you're applying with low stats? Okay. Here we're getting some answers. Abdullah says it shows variety and shows commitment. Danae says it shows dedication. It shows you were busy working on other important activities, says Katie. To not seem bland, says Jose. To provide possible explanation, it gives admissions committee more context for your grades. Lets the committee see how much you have on your plate. To demonstrate your commitment to medicine. There's a lot of answers coming in. We have a very active group here today. Shows work ethic, shows desire to become a physician, well-rounded, demonstrates your strengths in other areas and qualities that could make you a qualified doctor other than academic competence. Do you want to go from there?
Yeah.
Thank you all.
I absolutely agree with all of those responses. So yeah, show them how hard you've been working, how possibly you have overcommitted yourself to service, right? That's a great reason, right? That's one of the best possible reasons you could have to explain, right, a lower MCAT or GPA.
As long as it's I think combined with higher grades later on.
Yes, as long as there's improvement. Yes. Yeah. But right, there's really no better explanation. And also, you do want to share things like if there was a death in the family, or if you were severely ill, or a family member was seriously ill, right? There are reasons, logical reasons, why someone would, struggle for a little while. But as long as you improve, sometimes it's better to share that information, state the facts of it, to help the selection committee see that, oh, this is a logical, good explanation. We accept this, and look at how he or she improved, right? So, yeah, it can be helpful to share what happened. I think some students don't want to share, and you don't want to overshare. But letting them know that something did happen is better than just not addressing it at all, right? So for the activities section, I would just include the details, right, of how committed you were to working in the community, right? If you overcommitted yourself, highlight this strength, right, in the number of activities you have, as well as, by demonstrating your dedication to service, and to demonstrate what you learned from it and how you've improved your time management skills. The improvement piece is so important, right? You can stumble as long as you demonstrate improvement. And I am repeating that so that you will remember it. If you were evaluating applications at a medical school, so I'm asking you to change your perspective for a moment. What would you look for in the application of someone with numbers that might be lower than their average? So for those of you listening, if you were evaluating applications at a medical school, what would you look for in the application of someone with numbers that might be lower than their average?
Okay, in the question window, please. Reasons for the GPA to be lower, burning desire, what makes them unique, compassion, it's a good one, character, perseverance, compassion mostly, and desire for the profession, life experiences, their passion for the community, commitment to medicine, to the underserved, life experience, a different set of skills, resilience, undergrad, that's a question, not an answer. Commitment to service, perseverance, research experience, clinical experience, what an applicant may offer a lacking population, probably an underserved population. Clinical involvement, teamwork.
Yeah, these are fantastic, right?
Right.
So you would look, right, for, if you're looking at the major categories, you would look for, are they from an underserved community, or are they representing an ethnicity that's considered underrepresented in medicine? Were they from a low-income community? What kind of school systems did they attend? If it was low-performing public schools, maybe the schools couldn't provide enough textbooks or basic materials to students, right? So they want to know what was going on if there was a death in the family, right? They want to know, what's going on, and they want to look for stronger. If you have weaker numbers, as long as you have stronger activities, if you demonstrate how dedicated you are, how much you care, especially right through your involvement in a number of communities. Yeah, I love what everybody said. That is absolutely true. So the reasons why, right, is the reason why is that they really want to choose students who are going to excel in their medical school program. Right? The worst thing that could ever happen is that you accept a student and they struggle, or they are asked to leave. And that is the worst feeling for not only the student and their classmates, right? Medical school is already such a high pressure situation, but that also hurts the reputation of the school, right? So it is so important to look at these other parts of the application to make sure you have well-rounded students who will be able to do well in your program. So for the statement of disadvantage, this is often a very challenging section to complete, but it will only help you explain why you may have struggled academically, or why you were not able to focus on studying only on the MCAT if you could not afford the test prep program or time off work to study. Will anyone be completing this section? If you could give us a show of hands.
Please raise your hand if you're going to be completing the section. About 25, 27%. Sometimes the hands go up and
Okay,
down.
wow. Okay, wow. Okay,
The question
excellent.
was, are you going to complete the statement of disadvantage? Somebody asked in the question window, and if you could
Ah,
raise your,
it's
raise your hand in click on that hand icon. That's what we're asking.
important to know the question.
Right. Yeah, we're actually now it's about 30, 31%.
Okay, excellent.
Okay.
Reminds me of the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Universe, right? When they know the answer, but they don't know what the question is, right?
Right.
Yeah, you don't want to be in either one of those situations.
Right.
Okay, so when you're applying as disadvantaged, what that means is that you've experienced some form of social, economic, or educational disadvantage at any time in your life. So in my experience, especially things have changed over time, right? Students who, and I'll give you examples of each one, students who apply only with educational disadvantage or who apply only with a learning disability may have a much harder time than someone who's applying with social and economic disadvantage. So social disadvantage would be if you grew up in a single parent household, if you were treated differently due to your ethnicity, language, religion, sexuality, or for any other reason. Economic disadvantage would be if you attended low-performing public schools, in a low-income neighborhood, if your family was on food stamps, if you lived in Section 8 housing, if your parents, or family struggled to meet your basic needs, if there wasn't enough food or just basic resources available. An educational disadvantage would be if you had a learning disability. I think I misspoke earlier. This would also include attending low-performing public schools or schools that could not provide enough textbooks or basic resources to students. Yeah, so those are the three different kinds of disadvantage. And honestly, AMCAS, most medical schools prefer to see students apply as disadvantaged who have social and economic disadvantage, especially economic disadvantage, because they'll ask you about the family's average income. They'll ask about how many people were in your household, if you received any financial need-based scholarships. And so it's very easy to document and to provide evidence for economic disadvantage. And it can be harder to prove social or educational disadvantage. So most medical schools do prefer to see economic forms of disadvantage. And if you've experienced all three, then you should definitely mention it. And depending on the situation, I recently had a student ask about whether they should apply as disadvantaged. They had a learning disability, and they were also considered disabled, right? They had physical disabilities that limited their access to education. So in that case, depending on the severity of the situation, if it also impeded his or her ability to earn an income or affected their life in other ways, then it would possibly be appropriate for them to apply as disadvantaged. Okay, so strategies for completing this section. Really, the best way to do it is to state the facts. You don't want to create a sob story. You don't really want to give an anecdote in this section. Talk about, I remember one student writing about how his family had to open the garage door and turn the lights on a car to be able to have light shine into the dining room so they could see while they were eating because they weren't able to pay their electric bills. Right? So no need to paint a picture for this section, right? It's just better to state that your family was not able to afford, right, to cover the cost of the electric bill or basic services, and that you struggled or weren't able to do homework or didn't have access to the same educational materials or opportunities. So for this section, just state the facts. You also don't want to replicate anything from the personal statement to this section. There should be no copy pasting, from the personal statement here or vice versa. So nothing should appear word for word the same in more than one section. Okay, so any questions about any of the topics we've covered so far?
There are lots of questions.
Okay.
There's one that came up several times when you were talking about what is a low GPA, and that is, how does the science GPA fit into this? Obviously, I don't believe that AAMC provides like data on the science GPA. But
yeah, that's such a fantastic question, because I
yeah.
agree with you. I don't remember ever seeing that, Linda.
Right.
Yeah.
But can you just, based on your experience, kind of touch on the role of the science GPA? I mean, let's say somebody has an overall high GPA but low science, or overall high science, low overall, high science GPA, low overall GPA. How does it play?
I would say a safe rule would be anything below a 3.0 would be considered low.
Right. And would seriously disadvantage you in applying, right?
It does. It does, because many schools maintain a 3.0 as a minimum requirement. And some of the schools will actually say on their website, they'll let you know, we have a minimum cumulative in science, GPA of X, Y, and Z, right? So for most schools, a 3.0 is a minimum requirement, but of course, that may be higher on some campuses, right?
Okay.
Each school is completely different, right?
Right. Now, just in connection with this, I mean, I think a high MCAT is certainly one way to show the academic ability that one needs to succeed in medical school. But another way, probably a very effective way, is just to take additional courses and do well in them. That shows that you know how to apply yourself now in a demanding curriculum. And I'm talking now about science-based courses. So one member of the audience is asking, what if you cannot overcome it with more coursework? Is there anything you can do? I say, if you can't overcome it with more coursework because you can't afford to go to school, or perhaps you've taken tons of courses and you're at some kind of credit limit in terms of undergraduate coursework, do you have any advice then?
Oh, that's an interesting situation.
Yeah.
Well, what's fascinating is that more and more medical school curriculums are moving towards a hybrid systems of, like half of your coursework in person, half online. And so what that means is medical schools are becoming more receptive to students completing online coursework. Like 2 years ago, I had a student accepted into medical school who had completed some of his pre-med requirements online.
Right.
And maybe 5 years ago, that was unheard of, right?
Right.
That was like unacceptable. Like medical schools preferred in-person coursework. So if that might help, right? That might be something to consider for him or her, is that they could always do online coursework, and that might be significantly cheaper, no commute time. That might be easier. If that's really not possible, like Linda said, right, having a higher MCAT score to compensate, having really fantastic explanations. I mean, as long as you have an increasing trend in your GPA, you can apply with a lower score, but if you have a low score and you have a decreasing trend, I don't recommend applying.
Okay.
Having decreasing trends in MCAT or GPA is like a kiss of death in the application process.
Harvard also recently started an online program, not medical school, but a pre-medical school. It's not a post-bac program. It's called HMX. So, and I'm not even, I'd have to remember if it's graded or not. I think you can get some kinds of evaluation from it, but obviously you have the Harvard name. I interviewed the head of it. You can find it on, if you Google HMX on our site, I'm sure the podcast will come up. And it was a fascinating podcast. That might be also one way. Again, you have to do well in it. I do believe they give some kind of evaluations, even though it's not for credit. And there may be some ways you can get credit because it's an evolving program. But it is doing well in a program like that might also be. Now, there was another question. I know we want to move forward, but I do want to ask another question. Several people asked in terms of disadvantages, is mental illness considered a disadvantage for purpose of the statement of disadvantage?
Oh, that's such an interesting question.
Yeah.
It would depend on so many factors if it impacted you academically. I'd have a lot of questions I'd have to ask so as I could provide a better answer.
Okay,
I don't
that's
think I
fair.
could just answer that, yeah, in general.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah.
Let's see what else we have here in terms of some interest. Those were probably the two that came up over and over and over again in terms of, the science GPA um, and then there's another one. What if applicants have additional education beyond the bachelor's degrees? Let's say they're perhaps a pharmacist or a chiropractor, an optometrist. There's the additional professional degree is in the healthcare field, but it's not medicine per se. Does the undergrad and professional schools get GPA? Are they looked at separately? Are they calculated together? And is it different for MD or DO programs?
Yeah, that's a good question because I do have a very specific answer for it. So for training to become like an EMT or phlebotomist, any of the health sciences, that's going to, if it's at the undergraduate level, right, that's going to calculate into your undergraduate GPA. But the big but is that it will calculate into your health sciences all other GPA. That will not actually become part of your BCPM. For coursework like if you complete, a master's in nursing, an advanced degree in nursing, or like a PA
Program.
degree, that's going to be considered graduate level coursework. And undergrad is calculated completely separately from your graduate GPA. So in the AMCAS application, those would calculate completely separately. Med schools do love, that being said, they love students from other professional backgrounds. I think one of the brightest students I've probably ever worked with, she was a social worker for 10 years, and she was amazing as a social worker. She was so resourceful. And I'm sure, they were probably devastated to lose her as a social worker, but she just kept wanting to learn more, and it led her to apply to medical school, and now she's a doctor. But, having professional experience is highly valued because you will bring a unique perspective. You will bring a whole different level of professionalism, a whole different skill set. You'll probably end up, teaching your classmates. So medical schools do love non-traditional applicants with other degrees in different fields. Another example I can think of is a student who worked for Novartis for many years in the pharmaceutical industry, decided he wanted to go to medical school, and he ended up attending Harvard. And now, he's actually going into radiology, oncology. So, they do love other degrees, other backgrounds.
Okay, I think we should continue.
Yeah, okay. So now we're going to talk about school selection. So if you're applying with low scores, school selection is such a critical part of your strategy. So it's important to carefully consider the schools you're applying to because you can maximize your chances of acceptance by applying to the right schools. Right? There are just some med schools that are more likely to accept students with lower scores, as I've learned over the years. So for those of you who are reapplicants, are 17%, how many schools did you apply to?
We have 12, 10, 7, 15 to 20. Somebody wrote all in Texas. The 7 one was all in Texas. 20. 5 or 6. 5 MD, 12 DO, 18. Anybody else? How many schools did you apply to? 6. Somebody else? Anybody apply to 30? Raise your hand if you applied to 30. A couple of hands went up. Okay. planning on 30. Okay. I applied to
Oh, interesting.
27. 27?
Interesting. So 7, that sounds like a gamble, right? So I would be nervous if a student was only applying to 7 schools. But I recommend that you apply anywhere from 20 to 25 schools, right? Statistically, the more schools you apply to, the better your chances. That being said, you have to be ready to return that many secondaries, right? And the students that I found to be most successful are the ones who are already writing their secondaries before they've submitted the primary. And I am very happy to help students do that because you're setting yourself up for success by starting early. So for those of you who may be eligible to receive the FAP, which is the Fee Assistance Program offered through the AAMC, right? If eligible, you can get a reduced fee for the MCAT exam. You pay, I think, half the price if you haven't yet taken it. Free access to the MSAR. You get to apply to 16 schools for free. The application fee is waived for both the primary and the secondaries. And you have until December 31st to apply for the FAPA program. So if you think that you might be eligible, and honestly, I think I've had students who were not applying as disadvantaged, but who ended up getting the FAP because they met the socioeconomic requirements. So the FAP, they will keep giving out the waivers until they run out of them. So it wouldn't hurt to apply if you think that money has been a struggle or a challenge, and if it would significantly help you, to be able to apply to more schools, or to be able to afford to apply to more schools. So in selecting schools, the first step, right after applying for the FAP, if you're eligible, is to evaluate your stats. So what you want to do is calculate your cumulative GPA and your science GPA. And I've had a lot of questions about this recently. The science GPA is not provided on your transcripts, right? The cumulative is. But to get your science GPA, you'll need to just go to a free GPA calculator online and type in your BCPM courses. So that's biology, chemistry, physics, mathematics. So any courses, right, that are BCPM or should be calculated into your science GPA. So we're going to look at the reports from the AAMC. For all applicants, as you can see on the screen, the average MCAT for all applicants is a 504.7. The average cumulative GPA for all applicants is a 3.56, and this is for MCAS allopathic. And the average science GPA is a 3.45. So in the reports section on the AAMC or the AMCAS website, you can actually see these numbers. So for matriculants, it's a 510.4 for students accepted into allopathic medical schools. And the average cumulative GPA is a 3.71, and an average science GPA is a 3.64. But the thing with the science GPA, as we mentioned before, is I don't believe that's available on the individual school MSAR information. Okay, so those are the overall numbers. So for osteopathic ACOMAS, for all applicants, the average MCAT is a 500. The average cumulative GPA for applicants is a 3.45. And they do not share a science GPA at all on the ACOMAS website. For matriculants to osteopathic medical schools, the average MCAT is a 502, and the average cumulative GPA is a 3.54. And again, there's no science GPA listed. It's interesting because they used to list it, and this is the first year that it hasn't been available. So one of the best ways to help you decide what schools you should apply to is to compare your numbers to the schools. So looking at your cumulative GPA, your science GPA, and your MCAT scores, and seeing, right, which schools, for which schools you fit into their ranges that are available in the MSAR. And I think you'd have to go to the individual osteopathic medical schools to see if they share that information on their individual websites, but that's not available on the AACOMAS website. Okay, so then with selecting schools, right, you want to make sure that at least one of your numbers is available, or one of your numbers fits into the available range of scores that they share. So if your GPA fits within their range, but your MCAT's just slightly out, right, you can still apply to that school. It may be a reach school, but you could still apply. Same with MCAT, right? If your MCAT's firmly within the range, but your GPA is not, or it's just out of range, that would be ideal, then you could still apply. But, if you're way below both those ranges, don't apply. If your numbers are, if one number is way out of range, but the other's in, I think you'll have to decide whether it's worth your time. But if if one of your numbers is just out of range while the other's firmly within range, you could definitely add that school to your list. And if both numbers are within the school's range, that should be your safety list, right? Your safety list of schools. So if you fit within both their MCAT and their GPA range, that would be your safety school list. Okay, so another way to approach school selection is to educate yourself by attending pre-med conferences to network with other students, and medical school outreach officers, to visit medical school campuses, to research schools that specialize in your research interests or fields of interest. And the timeline, especially if you're applying with low scores, is something that you want to take into consideration. So applying early is critical, right, especially when applying with lower numbers. So any other questions?
Okay, there are lots of questions, and we still have another Q&A planned.
Okay. And this is the one, I think. Yeah.
Let's see. There several questions are asking about the reputation of the school that people attended, the impact of attending, let's say, community college for some of the time. Can you address that? There's several people asking these kinds of questions.
I'm so sorry. Could you repeat that?
Sure. What if somebody attended community college for some of the med school requirements, or what if what is the impact of school reputation on the way their transcript is evaluated?
Yeah, so it's not going to hurt you if you take courses at a community college unless you're trying to get into an Ivy League medical school. So, that will not hurt you. There is conversation about where you completed the coursework. Selection committees will talk about, like UC Berkeley GPA, versus another school, right? There are more rigorous programs out there, right? So that will be part of their discussion, but the MCAT, as a standardized exam, is supposed to help them navigate those differences, right? To give them a more reliable way to compare students' foundation in the sciences, ability to answer challenging questions. So they will be using the MCAT to differentiate between applicants more reliably than, the school reputation.
Okay, great. Now there are a lot of other questions here. A lot of them having to do with what is early, what is late, and how do gap years figure into those definitions. I think there's some confusion, at least among some of the people here, like if they take a gap year, are they then considered late or not? And I think the meaning of early and late is within an application cycle. But can you address that again? Because there's several questions on that point.
Yeah, that's like 3 questions in one.
Yeah.
Right?
Okay.
This person should write exam questions. Right?
Probably not. No, it's several people. It's several people asking related questions. Yeah.
Yeah. So what is early? So early would be, right, for AMCAS, the application opens in May. You can begin to fill it out. In June, you can begin to submit it. So like this past Friday, June 1st, the application opened. And so students are frantically working to submit their application as soon as possible. So applying, in my opinion, applying anywhere from June to July, June would be early, July would be okay. And then August is just too late. Yeah, so the sweet spot is basically June, July, and then August really becomes too late. Unless you're applying as a disadvantaged applicant and you have a really compelling story that will, like people will be brought to tears. There's, be a violin playing in the background, right? I've only ever seen like students who were orphans or who had like a crazy amount of struggle to overcome get accepted as late as August. And then September is like no man's land, right? It's just crickets, right? And the thing is that medical school admissions for MCAS and ACOMAS is rolling admissions. So they may just not even get to your application. They may not even read it if you submit that late. If they have selected all the space they have for secondaries, they've filled all their interview spots, or they're close to filling it, they may not even read your application if you submit August, September. So you can't even take it personally if they reject you, right? Because they may never have even opened your application.
Right.
The gap year, so to address the gap year question, so taking a gap year, that does not mean you're applying late in any way, right? That was the question, Linda?
Yes.
Yeah. So a gap year, if used strategically, a gap year can make all the difference between somebody getting accepted or not. For example, I have a client right now who realized last cycle that he had a very heavy workload. He was in the middle of finishing a major research project, working on 2 publications. He's absolutely amazing with what he's doing. And when he found out about secondaries, he had no idea about secondaries. So when I told him about the secondaries process, he realized that, he may be better off applying early next cycle rather than late this cycle, because I think he was waiting for an MCAT score.
Right.
And then having pre-written all of his secondaries, having everything ready to go even before the primary opened. And that's what he's done. And those are the students who are most likely to get accepted because, right, he's kicking back, having a fantastic time. It has been such an honor, a privilege, and a blast to work with him this year, to get to know him and to be able to give him the best possible attention, support, and advising, because he started so early and took his time with each part of the application. So a gap year, you're not considered a late applicant just by taking a gap year. It's the time of year or the month that you submit your application that determines whether you're late or not. And if you use a gap year, just to, backpack around Europe, although I've never heard of anyone doing that, that's going to be a problem, right? But if you use that year to work in the medical field, to gain valuable clinical leadership, community service, right, then that could be the difference between an acceptance and a rejection.
Okay. We have a lot of questions, and we will resume the Q&A in just a few minutes, but I think you wanted to finish up, and then I have a little bit to say, right?
Sure, yeah.
So I just want to thank Alicia, first of all, for presenting up until now. And Alicia has given you the what of applying to medical school with low stats, but not the how. It's impossible, and some of your questions are kind of bringing that out. It's impossible to give you the how with any depth and specificity in a webinar for the many. We have to be general in our comments and even to a certain extent in our answers. But you, each one of you, is an individual applying to medical school, and each one of you has unique talents and perhaps a weakness or two. That's why you're here. You don't want to let a mistake or blemish prevent you from pursuing the career of your dreams. Your goal is to apply confidently and successfully to the best programs for you. Now, the medical school application process is grueling and the stakes are high. AMC last year processed 830,016 applications from 3,042 applicants, 21,030 matriculants. You'll see on the slide. I'm not going to repeat all the data. But the bottom line here is that that's an acceptance rate of just under 40%. That actually is the year before this. This year's number went up to about 42%. The COMAS numbers are similar, but actually a little worse, only a 32.7% matriculation rate. Now, given the complexity of the application process and the high stakes, you need an expert guide who knows the process inside out, someone like Alicia, and who can support you through this grueling journey. You need Accepted to be your guide. With Accepted, you'll get access to professional expert advice, you'll save time, you'll apply with confidence, and you'll submit your best. Accepted has guides like Alicia who can advise and mentor you as you choose where to apply, how to mitigate those weaknesses, how to highlight your strengths, and show fit, demonstrate that you will be a contributor, and ultimately gain acceptance. Here's what I recommend you do after the webinar. Go to accepted.com/medical services, choose the service that's right for you, get the guidance that you need, and apply confidently and effectively. Now, some of you may say, isn't Accepted expensive? Well, so is rejection. I mean, the fees alone it's about $125, $150 per school, just the application fees. I'm not talking MCAT prep. I'm not talking travel to interviews. I'm not talking additional year of reduced pre-physician earnings during this additional gap year, or the potential that you could have gotten into a better program, or perhaps with better or lifetime earnings. Even that's possible. So every year we work with applicants who talk to us a year earlier and decide, after taking the do-it-yourself approach and getting rejected, to work with us this time around. They would have been better off working with us initially, and so would you. While we did not have an independent survey of our clients, our data shows that our clients enjoy actually a 90% acceptance rate to MD and DO programs this past cycle, the one that for the entering class of 2017. The previous year was about 84%. But enough from me. What do accepted clients say? Well, here's a couple of testimonials. I was offered 4 interviews total and was accepted to 2 schools. I'm eternally grateful to you, Alicia, for all the critical advice and help you gave. I could not have made it through the application process without your help. Or the one on the right, I'm so excited about acceptance to Western Michigan and still trying to soak in the news. Working with Alicia has been an indescribably wonderful experience and one of the best investments of my life. And that's what it is. It's an investment. Now, Alicia is great, and she is available at the moment, but she does book up. So here are a couple of testimonials for other consultants. Wow. Hello, Sid. Wow, I'm so impressed. You are a genius. I can't believe how well you managed to cut my essay in half without compromising my tone or eliminating little stories. There are 17 more hours left till the application is due, and I'm not stressed at all because I know I have you by my side with this essay. Or, Herman is all around brilliant. He is receptive, considerate, and very talented at editing on both a macro and micro level. His ideas and input transformed my essays. I have no doubt that his help has made a huge difference in the quality of my applications. I would recommend Herman to anyone. But once again, my advice to you is visit www.accepted.com/primary, choose a service that's right for you, and then apply confidently and effectively. Let's just go back to the questions. Okay? So the questions are, we have some great questions here. My MCAT score will be posted on July 1st. When do you think I should submit my primary so that it will get approved just after my MCAT score is posted? And there are several questions like this. In other words, if you don't have your MCAT score yet, should you submit your MCAS application as soon as possible? Should you wait to submit it until the MCAT is ready? What is the best way to handle that situation?
Yeah, that's a question I think we get every year, Linda. So the way that I recommend you decide is look at your practice exam scores. Are they strong enough that you feel confident that, if you submit your application now and then, have your score attached to your application later, right? You want to make sure that your score is going to be strong enough, because even if you withdraw your application, say you're not happy with your score, what would happen is that you would still be considered a reapplicant. So, they say you can withdraw your application, and basically that just means that you don't have to return secondaries, right? You officially drop out of the application cycle, but you would still be considered a reapplicant. So in this life, you really have 3 chances to apply to medical school. Just in the last couple of years, Harvard is now only accepting applications from applicants applying a first or a second time. They're not accepting applications from students who are applying a third or more times. And Harvard is a trendsetter, right? They often set trends.
Yeah.
They're the first medical school I've seen to start doing that, and I'm not sure if they're the only. I don't know if you've heard about any other schools, Linda.
I haven't.
Yeah. So what that means is, right, you really have 3 chances to apply. In my experience, I've helped students get in who've applied a first, a second, or a third time. I've heard rumors about students getting in who've applied a 4th time, but I've never directly seen that happen. I've never seen that happen myself. So that's why you do want to be judicious about how many times you apply. So if you could apply to medical school an unlimited number of times, I would say, sure, go for it, right? Submit it without the score. But knowing that you really have only 3 chances to apply to medical school this cycle or in your lifetime, and to know that they'll take your application seriously, right? Because the 4th time you apply, they may not even look at it. And I know at UC Davis School of Medicine, we had a guy who applied like 17 years in a row. I mean, it was like, they would giggle when they got his application because he wouldn't change a single thing. And he would just every year apply, right? And wouldn't change anything. So it was a little bit, right, insane. Insanity, right? The definition of insanity is, right, doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results.
Right.
So you don't want to put yourself in that insane category. But that's an extreme example. But that really does hurt you to be applying multiple times and not to have all the information. That's tricky too, because if you're submitting before you have your MCAT, having your MCAT helps you narrow down the list of medical schools you're going to apply to. So having that as a wild card, right, something that you don't know what it's going to be, well, that sounds really exciting. It also sounds very stressful, right?
For sure.
So, yeah, right? So use your practice exam scores to decide, right, if you want to take the risk, because it is a risk. But if you know yourself, if you know you're somebody who thrives under extreme pressure, go for it. Sure, go for it. But if you know that this is maybe your first time taking the MCAT, your practice scores have been up and down, you're not sure, I would wait till you have your score. In July 1st, that's a fantastic time. What you could do is get everything ready to go. That would give you enough time to perfect, right, your materials and make sure everything is gorgeous. All the T's are crossed, the I's are dotted, and then you could submit July 1st, and that would be a fantastic date to submit.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
All right, let's see if we have some other good questions. There's a lot of questions here. Which one is better, a formal or informal post-bac program?
Ooh, that's a hard one, actually.
That's a good question, though. It probably depends, right?
You know me.
I know.
So I published a book on pre-medical post-bac programs that's available on Amazon, and it was published through accepted.com. So that book was intended to serve as a reference for students, and it has sections about what is an informal post-bac, how do you do it. Section 2 is, what are formal post-bac programs, and then I have success stories from students and sample personal statements. as well as interviews with program directors from postbac programs across the country, and then also special master's degree programs. And then I define all the secret types of programs, like, conditional acceptance programs, and other secret types of programs. So the book might be very helpful if you're not sure which path to take. But, looking at the numbers that we shared today, right, that should give you a good idea or sense of what is a low MCAT or GPA. Should you apply this cycle? Is there an increasing trend in those scores? If so, what are the options from there? So does that answer the question?
I think so. Okay, let's get to another question here. Okay, as a reapplicant, how much of your personal statement must change? Like, could you just add a couple of new paragraphs and that would be okay? Or do you have to change up the majority of what you had before and add new stuff?
Yeah. So if you're a reapplicant, it's one click for the schools that you previously applied to look at your previous application. So if you're applying to the same schools, yes, you will need to absolutely rewrite your essays. And also, you should have new things to say, right? New experiences. You're a different person. You're a year older or, a couple years older. So hopefully, right, you'll have new exciting insights and reflections to share. So if you are applying to the same medical schools as you previously applied, yes, you absolutely need to rewrite all your essays.
Okay. Let's see, I'm going to take one more question. And I went to UC Davis and had a lower GPA than had I gone to a state school because UC Davis was much more rigorous in its curriculum. The medical schools delineate between two applicants at different programs of difficulties. If so, to what degree?
So the selection committees will just discuss, right? They'll discuss the different campuses, of students that they're looking at. But really, they're going to use the MCAT, which is a standardized exam, to provide a more direct comparison. So I would say that's not going to make as significant a difference. The actual GPA, the numbers, are most important. So even if you went to a community college for 2 years and then maybe a 4-year school for the next 2 years, as long as you're not trying to get into Ivy League medical schools, then it would matter. It doesn't matter as much. The grades are, I would say the grades are more important than anything. What's your take on that, Linda?
I would say the grades are more important. This is the era of holistic admissions. So schools know if a program is considered more rigorous or less rigorous. And they're going to look at your application holistically. So if you've done well in your coursework and your MCAT is solid and you've done research and you have clinical exposure and maybe you've done a couple of other really interesting things, then the fact that you went to a school without the greatest reputation is not going to hurt you at all. If you went to that same school and you have a mediocre GPA and a mediocre or worse MCAT score, and maybe your idea of volunteering consisted of shadowing one doctor and working in the ER for a few hours, well, then the fact that you didn't go to the most rigorous school is going to be like, well, that kind of fits with the rest of the profile. So, it gets more complicated when maybe there are some things that are maybe you have a high GPA and a mediocre MCAT, but you did some really good community service and leadership experiences, and you did do some research, and so then life gets a lot more interesting and much harder to predict, and then then it's harder to say. And as consultants say so often, we've been kind of joking about it this whole time. It depends. We can give you an indication of where we think you can improve your application and strengths, and how to maximize those strengths, mitigate weaknesses, including the reputation of your school. But the best way is simply to do well. If you do well consistently, then the schools are going to say, well, this person maybe didn't go to the best school. Perhaps they were geographically limited or financially limited, but they did great, and they did great on the MCAT, and they have wonderful experience, and that's how we want them to get in. Now, Leah is asking what's a title of the book that you wrote, and it is a definitive guide to post-bac pre-medical programs, correct?
Yes. Yep, that's
Okay.
it.
The definitive guide to post-bac programs will probably get you to the right place.
And I'd like to add too, Harvard actually has a lawsuit against it because students are saying students of Asian backgrounds,
Mm-hmm.
and I think it's awful they lump all Asian students in one category, right? Like it just doesn't represent all the different ethnicities within that group. But a group of, I think it's Indian American and Asian American students are suing Harvard, saying that they have higher expectations in terms of GPA and MCAT for students from their backgrounds as compared to the general applicant pool. And Harvard is fighting really hard not to share, right, that admissions data, because they're saying, right, that it would reveal industry secrets. But it'll be really interesting to see what happens.
Right. And I know, I know I said the previous question was the last one, but there's another one I think is very good. This is from Sumit. And how much of a factor is a personal statement relative to the GPA and MCAT? It depends.
Yeah, it really depends. It really depends. I mean, it's a lot of strategy, right? A lot of it isn't just one size fits all. You know, the advice, and I think that's what I love being a consultant, because each student is completely different and completely unique in their needs. And so, you know, one student will need significant help in one area versus, versus another. And the advice is going to be completely different, right? Depending on what your strengths are, your weaknesses. It's going to be a very different strategy for each student, as it should be. And, same goes with the personal statement. My goal is that every client I work with is excited to submit their personal statement because they feel that it fully represents their personality. And they've, worked hard, and it's crafted in such a way that the admissions committee gains insight on who they are, what's important to them, of course, why they're going into medicine, and will lead to secondaries and interviews. So, I'm sorry I can't give a more specific response to that question, but I would just need a lot more information.
Right. And I think that that's kind of something that we emphasize in general working with our clients. Again, as I said this before, this is the era of holistic admissions. On some level, everything counts. You can't say, oh, I have a great GPA, the MCAT doesn't count. I have a wonderful MCAT, the GPA doesn't count. It all counts. And they look at it all, and they're going to look at trends, and they're going to look at where you got the good grades and where you got the poor grades, and what did you do about it, and did you show resilience and improve, and all these kinds of things. And have you shown a commitment to service? Did you overcome obstacles that perhaps others didn't overcome? All these things are going to be factored in. Now, the personal statement, getting back to your question, is the place where you can show some of these more subjective elements, the more intangible ones. I mean, a GPA, it's quantitative. You can't touch it, but it's quantitative, and that gives it a certain concreteness. The MCAT score, even more concrete, because it's something that everybody has in common. GPAs, obviously, different schools, different level of rigor, different grading scales. So the personal statement is where, once you are competitive, in my opinion, in terms of your experiences and your grades and academics, you can show how are you going to contribute to medicine, to the school's community, and ultimately to your patients. And that's what the personal statement is about. So it's not that one counts and one doesn't count. They all count. They have different functions in the application process. And all the functions have to be fulfilled in one way or another for you to get accepted. That would be my take on it. Now, I want to again thank Alicia for an outstanding webinar. And I have a final thought and story to share this evening. I want to thank you, applicants, also friends, for your time, your attention, your questions, your answers. I want to share that final thought first. Your past, especially the low stat or 2, don't have to define your future. You can change them or bring counter evidence of your abilities to bear. There are also the essays, the activities, secondaries, and interviews. All these are in your control. Make them the best they can be with our help. And now the story. Pat, and this is a pseudonym, came to accepted with good grades but a below average MCAT for MD programs. She was doubting herself and struggling. She started working with Alicia last spring, and in December I received the following email from her. It'll be on your screen right there. I cannot thank Alicia enough for being such an incredible support system and mentor throughout the long and challenging process of applying to medical school. As of December 2017, I have been accepted to an MD school. I am so thrilled and grateful for the opportunity to work with Alicia. The services offered through Accepted are worth it because the consultants are knowledgeable, supportive, honest, and thorough. I would not have been able to accomplish an MD admission without Alicia's help during the application process and especially preparing for interviews. Because the mock interviews were so amazing, because of them, I felt confident in my ability to convey my own personal story and manage any nerves during the interview. I would highly recommend working with Alicia to achieve your medical school goals. This applicant was later accepted to an additional medical school. Now, Pat had a below average stat, lots of doubts and nerves when facing interviews. She turned to Accepted for guidance and support, and she received a wonderful Christmas present, medical school acceptance. She's going to start medical school this summer, probably in a few weeks actually, and she's going to become a doctor. She's on the path to her dream career. Do as she has done, and do as so many other applicants have done over the last 20 plus years of Accepted's existence. Take the steps she took, they're on your screen, and get accepted.